The Opium War, also known as the Chinese Opium War, was fought between China and Britain from 1839 to 1842. The war involved both sides, using both land and sea forces, and is generally considered to be the first modern war in history. It was caused by China's attempts to stop the opium trade. In short, the Chinese wanted to stop British merchants from selling opium grown in India to Chinese citizens, even though it was extremely popular amongst them. But Britain was like, hey, we're making lots of money from this, and it's not our fault that your people have such a sick addiction. So China was like, well, then we're gonna take it by force. And Britain was like, oh, okay, bring it on. And then they did, and China lost. But let me tell you all about it. The First Opium War began in 1839 during the Qing dynasty, when Chinese officials cracked down on the opium trade in southern China. The main reason for this was because, well, opium was causing all sorts of social problems. People were becoming addicted to the stuff like crazy. Families were torn apart as opium dens attracted all social classes, ages, and genders. The Chinese economy was suffering, as people spent all their money on the drug, and on top of all that, millions of Chinese people were dying every year from overdoses. So to solve this problem, the Chinese government did what any rational government would do. They created a special police force to seize opium and shut down dens. This force was led by a man named Lin Zexu, who was given full power to use any means necessary to stop the opium trade. Over 10,000 British-owned opium dens were shut down, and over 14 million pounds of opium were confiscated and destroyed. Lin Zexu was actually quite popular in China at the time for doing this. However, the British weren't too happy about it. You see, the British East India Company had been growing opium in India since the 1700s. They would then smuggle it into China and sell it to merchants who would then sell it to addicts. The company was making so much money from this trade that they actually started growing more opium in India specifically to sell to China, and the Chinese crackdown was seriously hurting their profits. In response, the British sent a fleet of ships to China to intimidate the Chinese government into letting them continue the opium trade. However, this didn't work. And so, in 1839, the British decided to just take the province of Hong Kong from the Chinese by force. The Chinese, under the command of Lin Zexu, fought back and actually managed to repel the British from Hong Kong. At this point, the Chinese government realized that they couldn't win a war with a naval power like Britain, so they asked Lin Zexu to stop the fighting while they negotiated peace with the British. However, this didn't last long as the British would soon invade again. This time, they were prepared for the Chinese. Under the leadership of Lord Palmerston, the British would go on to destroy the Chinese Navy and capture the Chinese port city of Guangzhou. The Qing government was now desperate. They had already lost half of the war, and they knew that if they didn't do something, they would lose everything. So they turned to the one thing that got them into this mess in the first place: opium. The Chinese began growing their own opium in Yunnan and Sichuan. To replace the opium they confiscated from British merchants, they then smuggled this opium into the coastal cities and sold it to the Chinese people. This, of course, made the British very happy, as this meant that they could get opium from the Chinese without having to smuggle it in themselves. In fact, the British liked it so much that they actually gave the Chinese a noble title for helping them maintain their opium addiction. Yeah, seriously, they called it the Order of the Double Dragon. Anyway, the British were so happy with the Chinese for helping them make money off of opium that they decided to end the war. The Treaty of Nanking was signed in 1842, which basically said that China had to give Hong Kong to Britain forever and allowed British merchants to freely import opium into the country. After this, the British would go on to win the Second Opium War against China as well, and things wouldn't really change much for the Chinese until the end of the Qing dynasty in 1911. But that's all for this video. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe and I'll see you next time.